It's now my pleasure to introduce our moderator for this evening, Dr. Nojang Khatami. Nojang is an assistant professor of political science at Fordham University in New York, and we're especially proud to note that he's an alumnus of UBC's PhD program in political science. Yes, and he's happy to be back. His research focuses on democratic theory, resistance, literature, and revolution, and his forthcoming book project examines dissent against oppressive political structures from Iran to North America. His public scholarship has appeared in The Progressive and the Boston Review, and he's a co-host of the podcast Politics and the Exilic City. We're delighted to have him back to campus to guide tonight's conversation. And finally, our featured guest speaker this evening, Hasan Piker. Hasan Piker is one of the most prominent political commentators of the digital age. A widely followed creator on Twitch, he reaches tens of thousands of viewers daily, engaging a large and politically active online community in real-time discussions of news, policy, and global events. His perspective has been shaped by firsthand experience with democratic backsliding and authoritarian politics in both Turkey and the United States. His work represents a new form of participatory political media, blending commentary, activism, and community building in ways that are reshaping how younger generations engage with politics. So please join me in welcoming Hasan Piker.
I bet Thomas Friedman didn't get that kind of reception. Anyway, no disrespect to all the previous guests. I'm actually probably going to deliver a much worse speech than everyone that came before me and then everyone that will come after me, including but not limited to Rachel Maddow. Especially considering that I just found out that I'm sharing a stage in a program with Thomas Friedman and Rachel Maddow approximately 10 minutes before I got out of the car. And I walked in, and they told me, "Oh, you have a speech," and I was like, "Oh yeah, you know, like a 2-minute speech, something like that." And they were like, "You signed on for 15 minutes." And I thought to myself, "Well, I done did it again. This is probably like the 20th time that I've done one of these sorts of college speeches where I just come out on stage and start blurting it out, and I have no understanding of what the event is, but I'm gonna try to do my very best. Especially considering that I speak for 8 hours uninterrupted, or usually interrupted with chat. It's not gonna be too difficult, I hope. But today, obviously, we're gonna be talking about one of my favorite subjects to discuss. According to all my naysayers, including the CIJA, I believe. I don't know if they're in the room right now. Sorry, I'm sorry that you guys couldn't stop me from coming to Vancouver. But I'm gonna be talking about one of my favorite subjects, according to my haters, which is America Bad. I think a lot of Canadians have learned that lesson if they weren't aware of this concept, except for the Albertans, that America is, as a matter of fact, somewhat of a parasitic force in the global New World Order. And it was actually one of my only failed predictions of 2025 when I thought that Pierre Poilievre, am I saying that right? Poilievre? Doesn't matter. This college campus is so woke, you don't even... Anyway, one of those guys that's usually well, I guess he wasn't really, but usually the Conservative Party, from where we're standing in America, always tries to be American for some weird reason. And I guess because of Donald Trump, that really backfired spectacularly last election cycle for you guys. And I thought he had a real shot, until I found out that Canadians do value dignity and sovereignty and don't want to be annexed by the United States of America. Which is a very healthy attitude to have, especially considering that I think with this last iteration of our beautiful President Donald Trump's attempts at forcibly annexing Greenland, which is a part of our NATO security cooperation. Someone should tell Donald Trump that. Especially after that, we saw many European leaders openly take to the stage at Davos and say, we'd rather be happy vassals than angry slaves. And I thought about that quite a bit. And I thought about Mark Carney's speech quite a bit. And I think that there is a failure of the previous liberal international order and consensus. And I don't think it's necessarily just Donald Trump, even though we like to talk about him as the harbinger of doom. The reality of the matter is these systems have been collapsing for quite a while. If you're in the third world, if you're in a developing nation, you already know exactly what it's like to be on the receiving end of endless amounts of bloodshed and domination. Now, of course, people of my political background have been talking about this for years. Lenin was one of those people that talked about it quite a bit. Imperialism being an absolute necessity as a global capitalist order, as profit rates have a tendency to decline. And we've seen this endless militarism and endless domination in the global south, in countries that are in the periphery, at the behest of super profits for international capital. But unfortunately now, America's appetite for instability and all of the potential promises of said instability for international capital has put new targets in its crosshairs, as Mark Carney and many others have talked about, middle powers. We're talking about the European Union, Canada, and many other countries that are stuck between what seems like American domination and the global liberal capitalist hegemony, and potentially the rise of regional powers such as Russia that do not shy away from irredentist action and oftentimes violent military conquest, and the behemoth of manufacturing that is China. Now, as you guys already know, BRICS nations have realized that this bargain of American domination was not always going to work out well for them, and that's the reason why they have sought out alternatives and tried to create different trade agreements and maybe even currency cooperative agreements with China, specifically to, at times, leverage their relationship that they have with the United States of America. And I've been a longtime advocate in developing European sovereignty and developing sovereignty for countries like Canada. And now, I believe, is the time for these middle powers to be able to develop sovereignty once again. And I fear that if these countries don't do it, specifically Canada, I worry that American domination will at first look like the tariffs negotiations that Donald Trump has seemingly haphazardly thrown around, and then, and in the worst case scenario, complete military annexation. Now that might sound terrifying to you guys, but we have the most peaceful option ahead of us, at least for the time being, because this growth that we are seeing, this change, this nuclear option of trade, this destruction of international agreements that America was not only the safeguard of, but also the architects of, are coming to a close. What comes next is up to all of us. And by that I mean not just international capital owners of different sorts, petty bourgeois, small business owners, mom and pop landlords and the like. I'm talking about you, the people, the workers, you who comprise the masses. And the quicker we develop sovereignty for ourselves, both in our workplaces, both in our universities, the quicker we organize for ourselves, the easier it will be for all of us to preserve said national sovereignty and to hopefully make it as costly as possible for America to continue dominating the world and engineering whatever kind of design they have. I saw a piece of this in action when I went to Minneapolis, because American domination has often put its crosshairs on developing nations, as I've talked about before, Iraq, Afghanistan, as recently as we saw in Venezuela, where the American government kidnapped the leader of Venezuela and his wife and is facilitating a mock trial, a sham trial at this moment. You don't have to love the Venezuelan, government. You don't have to be a communist or a socialist to recognize what that says for the international order, which was something that many European and even Canadian partners did not recognize initially as they celebrated this action, only to receive the exact same type of lack of autonomy when Donald Trump put his crosshairs on Greenland. It shouldn't take for Trump to go after a white partner country in Europe, a NATO partner country in Europe, for people to wisen up to our grand design. And when I say our, I'm talking about the American government. But the international destabilization that we have caused came back into the home front, as imperialism often does, in the form of fascism. Just as fascism arose from the failures of liberalism only but 100 years ago, the new wave of fascism is no longer seen as a revolutionary movement, but instead a movement away from liberalism. The American Republican Party is now transitioning away from a liberal conservative party to a fascist party. And as fascists often do, they are invested in domination and cruelty for cruelty's sake. And the reason why I brought up Minneapolis, Minnesota, and my experiences there is because, as of today, Tom Homan has decided that they are retreating the ICE occupation that unfolded in Minneapolis, Minnesota. And the only reason, and the only reason that happened was because the people got together, they organized, and they protected their neighbors. And while there was tremendous cruelty, kidnappings taking place on a daily basis, and community defense, and people that got shot and killed like Renee Good and Alex Peretti, rest in power, the people did not stand down under minus 35 degrees Fahrenheit. I don't know if you guys use Fahrenheit here. Minus 35-degree Fahrenheit weather. It was very cold. 60,000 people got together and did a day of direct action, somewhat of a general strike. They call it a general strike. It's not the same as the traditional general strike, but there was a day of action. Small businesses from the community also participated in this blackout. And in the aftermath of all of this participation in community defense, ICE was forced to back away. This is the most peaceful option. JFK has said, those who make peaceful revolution impossible make violent retribution inevitable. And I fear that violent retribution as the last option, which is why I'm here to talk today to you guys about what it means that the international order is falling apart. The old world is dying. A new world struggles to be born from its ashes. Now is the time for monsters. Gramsci said that. I hope I didn't destroy that quote. I was trying to paraphrase it. And on that note, I think I'm ready to go. I did 15 minutes. I don't even know how I did that. But yeah. Okay, should I just go sit down? I'm gonna do that now.
All right. Yeah, that was great, and clearly they love you.
Yeah, otherwise they would not have sat through that. They would have been like, boo, tomatoes.
Right. But no, I know you feel the love in lot of places that you go. So I know you just were passing through Nueva York or Afghanistan, as you call it, and you
Yeah.
you also, I mean, you in part helped make it Afghanistan, which, those of us who are
woke
in New
Sharia.
York. Yeah.
Inshallah, brother.
Islamic Republic of New York. Let's go.
Yeah.
So, I mean, there's a lot of love everywhere you go, and I think a lot of people, young people especially, I got tons of students at Fordham University where I teach, and also a lot of students, former students here at UBC who are just so excited about what you do, right? And the fact that you are this massive, prominent voice on the left, it means a lot to a lot of people. At the same time, you got your critics, you got your haters, you address that, and just the fact that,
Perhaps too much, that's what they tell me.
Yeah. But I mean, I think that, there are some of the criticisms that you get, and so what I wanted to do sort of just early on in some of these early questions is just allow you to just address some of those things.
Get it out of the way.
Get it out the way,
Get it right out of
and then we can come back to the themes.
Okay.
Yeah.
You came in hot. You were like 15 minutes, watch this.
Yeah, let's go.
Okay.
So, no, but I mean, this is a kind of general question about responsibility. So, thinking about it in terms of what we do as academics and, podcasters, journalists, and the things that you do, including like the fact that you just spoke to this, right, with the anti-ICE protests, the fact that you are very much on the ground and you have this form of activism that, I think is really, really admirable and really important to be doing that sort of work. What I'm wondering is, when it comes to the question of responsibility, how do you see that? What do you think, what would you say your primary responsibilities are when it comes to activism and in the world of streaming and sort of just in online spaces more generally?
Yeah, I try to deliver truthful analysis that's both true to myself and true to the facts on the ground to the best of my ability. And I do think about that responsibility all the time. It's something that I try to maintain to the best of my ability because I understand that for people under the age of 40, I used to say 25, now I'm saying 40. A lot of people see me as their primary news source, something that's open, something that's on in the background throughout their day. It's almost like an 8-hour CNN broadcast. So I try to not maintain a level of professionalism in my commentary necessarily, but definitely maintain a level of professionalism when it comes to verifiable evidence that I address and back my analysis or build my analysis on top of. Unfortunately, in this age of misinformation, with AI, with bad faith actors, the democratization of media has opened up opportunities for unique voices like myself to be heard. Voices that aren't so unique amongst the masses, but voices that are not necessarily represented in mainstream resources, in mainstream outlets, in legacy papers and whatnot. But there's also the other side of that, where there are a lot of people who lean into bias framing without even recognizing their own internal biases, and also sometimes just lie. Lying is OP, as I say all the time. Like people, you would be shocked if you are unaware, if you only get your news from, I guess, CBC, or that's what people. Oh damn, not a lot of CBC fans out here. Okay. Well, regardless, if you're only like reading The Guardian and New York Times, I mean, those are biased. They have different biases as well, but overall, they have an interest in trying to maintain a truthful compass to the best of their ability. Sometimes they lean too much into the State Department side of things, for my taste. But there is a whole world out there of people that take advantage of this information vacuum and just kind of make stuff up in whichever way they see fit.
Right.
And I try to combat against that to the best of my ability as well.
Right. Yeah, again, just real sort of testament to the importance of the kind of stuff that you do, right? So there's also this lingering question a lot of people, have been wanting to ask. And so you've been very clear that your criticisms are, when you talk about Israel, for example, that your criticisms are aimed at the Israeli government. and not Jewish people in general. And I know that you have many Jewish followers who agree with you on a lot of core issues, right? But even among those who agree with you on the issues, there are some that say that sometimes the way that you express that or the language that you use is, for some, it's not productive. And so I wonder sort of how you think about that trade-off and, how you approach it.
Yeah, I mean, this is a question I get all the time. And the way I see what I do, oftentimes people say this is a cop-out, but the way I see what I do is I'm an entertainer first. And as someone who tries to make this information as palatable as possible, I'm always going to, engage in hyperbole from time to time and try to crack jokes, even though a lot of the subject matter that I'm covering is very serious stuff. But I think I want to make it as accessible as possible. So in an effort to do so, there are going to be moments where I'm joking around a little too much, and then people don't like it. But I think that's a valuable trade-off. I think that's totally a valuable trade-off. Another part of the equation, of course, is the constant back and forth communication I have with everyone. Anyone that follows me right now on Twitch, please subscribe, by the way, because this is being streamed on Twitch as well. Piker Broadcasting Service. Anyone that follows me for 10 minutes on Twitch can talk to me in real time. And whether I have 300,000 live concurrent viewers or 30,000 live concurrent viewers, I'm constantly monitoring chat to such a degree that anytime there's a journalist in the room that's covering what I'm doing, they're like, this is the most insane thing I've ever seen. How are you paying attention to anything that's going on? And I have this free flow back and forth communication style in my coverage as well that I bake into my coverage as well. And that creates a unique opportunity for bad faith actors from time to time to really piss me off. I mean, you're a lecturer, it's you, I'm sure you have bad students sometimes that are just annoying. You know what I mean? They come up to you, they're like, nah, that's not what happened actually. I know better. And you're like, I'm your teacher.
It does happen.
Now, of course, there's professional safeguards there. But sometimes, imagine if you could just mute one of your students. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Yeah, it's awesome. You should try it. You put them in the dunce corner.
We got online classes, virtual classes.
But yeah, just click, Zoom, kicked out of the room, that sort of thing. But of course, in that dialogue, there are moments that are very passionate because the issues that I'm talking about, I feel for, and I get very impassioned at times. And of course, there are going to be moments of anger that might be unproductive, but that comes with the territory. And I feel like the medium itself has been so good in allowing people to have a say in the process and also learn and be entertained along the way, that I think that's a totally reasonable trade-off for someone like myself.
So would you, just a quick follow-up, would you say sort of provocation too? Is it important for you to be provocative to generate responses?
Provocative, as far as my commentary, yes. I mean, I used to have a show on the Young Turks called Agitative Propaganda. I think it's important to do agitative propaganda to unlock the class consciousness among the masses, which is missing from this equation, I think, especially in the Western world. Yeah. But as far as being provocative to say something crazy, no, that's not beneficial. I know people think that is the reason why I'm saying certain things, whether or not America deserved a certain specific day. But no, that's just coming out of me sometimes when I'm just really angry. But what's interesting is, in my experience, what I've found is that other people also share that same resentment. Other people also share that same anger. So when I'm yelling at a transphobic person, for example, I don't even know if I should say what I yell at them, or like a white supremacist racist, or someone who is denying the genocide in Gaza. Sometimes there are moments where I lose a little bit of control, and then I get a 7-day ban. It is what it is. Yeah. But that's not deliberate. There's no if I had the option to not have those moments, I would choose not to have those moments for sure.
Well, so I mean, since you just mentioned Gaza, and so on Palestine, I have this question, which is, in his book, One Day Everyone Will Have Always Been Against This, Omar El-Akkad powerfully articulated this idea that with regard to the atrocities that have been suffered by the innocent in Palestine, this is how he puts it. One day, things will change. It is not so hard to believe, even during the worst of things, that courage is more potent than contagion, that there are more invested in solidarity than in annihilation, that just as it has always been possible to look away, it is possible to stop looking away. So how do you align yourself in relation to what Omar expresses there? And do you agree with his position? And is this why you have been so vocal about Palestine and about Palestinians?
Yeah, absolutely. So I think people are good people in general. I think everyone is a kind person, but they are sometimes deluded or sometimes propagandized against certain positions and are made fearful of alternative visions of a better future. So I try to remind myself of that all the time, that everyone is, at the end of the day, a victim of social conditioning. And that definitely guides my first principles. It guides my commentary quite a bit. I've been an anti-Zionist, an avowed anti-Zionist, for the last 12, 13 years of my professional media career. And there was a time... It shouldn't even receive claps, really, because this is the most normal position. And I know it's shared by every single person in here, except for some plants maybe in the audience. But that is just, it's a humanitarian position. It's born out of being anti-genocide, anti-fascist, anti-apartheid. It's what I've learned. And I think that a lot of people have that. A lot of people's starting point is that, and then they work their way away from that with tremendous amounts of social conditioning. So I think it's actually much more difficult to make people turn a blind eye to these atrocities. And there's been a tremendous amount of success in bringing people back to that position of empathy, to that humanitarian perspective. And it's only because of the bravery exhibited by the Palestinians that were even in their final moments, showing exactly what Israel was doing. And I thought of myself living in the imperial core as someone who was profoundly privileged and profoundly fortunate, that the best I could do was offer a voice to that voiceless, offer a voice to that perspective to the best of my ability, in spite of all the setbacks set by numerous advocacy organizations, lobbying efforts in deplatforming and censorship, because it was the least I could have done. Because I knew that inevitably people were going to wake up to what was happening, and I think we're there now. We're there, that the overwhelming majorities of even Western society have now realized that this is untenable. A 14th century style siege taking place, a live Holocaust taking place in real time on people's phones that they can see in real time. I mean, this is completely unacceptable, and I think part of the reason why I do it is because I don't want those who were slain to die in vain, and part of it is because I want to preserve the safety and security of those that remain.
So well said. Appreciate you speaking to that. So, I mean, we want to get to a lot of the core issues, and I think some of these were things that you addressed already in the introduction that you gave. And so, part of this will be kind of circling back to things that you said and then just kind of elaborating on them. So, of course, we're going to want to talk more about Canada and about U.S. foreign policy in particular. So, again, you already spoke about this briefly, but when it comes to the views on Canada and the current government and the direction under Mark Carney, Mark Carney has openly expressed a desire to shift away from the U.S. toward China and other nations.
Vis-a-vis travel to China, baby. Can't beat it.
And so you already said this sort of in the lead up about the liberal international order and how that is in a sense in decay, right? And so Stephen Walt of Harvard Kennedy School, he saw this, Mark Carney's sort of fairly recent comments as an example of a significant moment of rupture in the whole liberal international order, right? And you also said in January, and again, kind of just repeated it here, that liberalism is essentially falling apart. So, the question is, for you to sort of elaborate on that, to elaborate on your perspective, again, why you think that is the case, and especially why Canada and the Canadian government's recent position is a good sort of indicator of that.
Yeah, I mean, first of all, I hope that Mark Carney follows through on that promise and it's not simply empty posturing. And he's simply saying that so that he can cut a better deal with Donald Trump at the end of the day. Because it is a matter of life and death. It's always been a matter of life and death for those in the global south, because the liberal international order, the new world design post-World War II, was very quickly and very effectively developed as a way to whip up support against this new front in the Cold War, against communism, against socialism. And that was a dual polar world back then. And it's obvious that in the aftermath of the dissolution of the USSR, it was a unipolar world. It was the American hegemony. And since the 90s, I attribute a lot of the accelerated demise of Western liberal capitalist countries to the lack of competition, lack of ideological competition. I don't know if that's like a unique perspective in general. I feel like many people understand it to a certain degree, whether it be the expansion of welfare states in social democratic countries that are close enough to the USSR in order to not succumb to the threat of a good alternative, a scary alternative that might work. But I think the accelerated Thatcherite, Reaganite ideology of neoliberalism, what some people call late-stage capitalism, happened because of that lack of competition. And basically, I'm saying is that capitalists are victims of their own success. They Sigma grind-set it too hard, and now they have endless appetite for profits to the best of their ability, and for that reason, they have been dominating the most malleable aspect of production, which is labor. First, they went out and sought out markets that had cheaper alternatives for labor, and then they decided to continue dominating their own domestic labor force to the best of their ability. So I think what I'm trying to get at in this long-winded answer is that this design was never beneficial for many countries in the periphery. It actually meant endless militarism, instability, puppet states that were established, and complete domination and bloodshed, sanctions at times. And now, I think Europe and Canada are getting a little bit of that same taste as well, in ways that they never thought, perhaps due to Western chauvinism, never thought that they would experience. So I hope that it's, like I said, not empty promises from Mark Carney, but a real testament, a real commitment to making sure that we find a more peaceful path forward for every single party involved, and not just an opportunity for middle powers to basically secure better trade negotiations and continue business as usual politics.
So would you say that when it comes to your position as being on the left, essentially socialist, Marxist, Marx famously said that capitalism is going to produce its own gravediggers, right? Yeah. It is already when he wrote that at the time. So when it comes to the sort of the actualization of that, do you think that it is still, do you look at it kind of similar to Marx as an inevitability, especially under these current conditions and, as you just described it?
Yes and no, because I think the expansive welfare states have given a lifeline over and over again to thwart domestic instability, and it's been very effective. I mean, America has destroyed labor militancy. I promise you, I mean, it's so bad in the United States of America that we have, I think, 9% labor union participation in the overall workforce, which is 6% lower than Chile, a country that we specifically dominated because they had they made the mistake of voting for a democratic socialist. We couped them and we installed Pinochet. And it was a neoliberal testing ground. And even then, right now in modern Chile, they have a higher labor union participation in the United States of America. So it's been very effective in undermining any sort of left mobilization. And so for that reason, I think, capital owners are very effective at engaging in class warfare and have been able to delude even regular working class people into believing that they are simply not an exploited proletariat, but temporarily embarrassed millionaires and billionaires. So for that reason, I think there is still, no matter how much domination exists, there is still this attitude amongst the dispossessed masses that things are probably fine. I can go to Tim Hortons down the street and get what are they called, the little Timbits, little Timbits, or I can go to McDonald's and get a Big Mac, and there is some truth to that. I mean, I think treats play a big role in sedating the masses for sure, but conditions haven't worsened yet. I think conditions have not gotten to the degree that it got to during the Great Depression, for example, but it does worry me that the right-wing forces internationally are aware of the collapse of the previous order, and they're trying to get ahead of it to the best of their ability by organizing in a fascist direction as fast as possible.
And I mean, we've been seeing that in parts of Latin America, right? And so, I mean, this is a good sort of pivot to this question. And since you just mentioned Chile, right? So the U.S., of course, has had a long history of intervention in Latin America. Anybody who studies this and knows about it, we know it has a long history. Guatemala in 1954, Chile in 1973, as you said, Nicaragua from 1981 onward, and just like the list goes on, right? There's almost no country in Latin America that has not been touched by U.S. military intervention. There is, though, in the case of Venezuela recently, there seems to be something really different in some ways, right? Because a lot of those interventions, that's like the ones in the 20th century, they tended to happen largely through, covert operations, the CIA, and forms of subterfuge, and it was often sort of like, it wasn't out in the open. But what we just saw in Venezuela just over a month ago, right? And again, you already spoke to this. Just the way that the U.S. operated in that situation, and Trump's like very brutal kind of bluntness about why they were doing it, literally coming out and saying we're going in for the oil, there's something sort of different in a sense, right? And how the U.S. is conducting itself abroad, and again, especially in Latin America. So, you've spoken about this issue, I know, at length. And you've addressed them many times, and not to mention on the importance of Cuba and what's been going on there. This horrible sort of the embargo and the blockade and the effects that that's having. What do you think these cases of the recent case of Venezuela, and then also what is going on in Cuba? What do you think this says about how U.S. foreign policy operates nowadays?
I mean, it's vulgar imperialism. I mean, in some ways, it's out in the open, and the brazen ways in which Trump operates, saying the quiet part out loud, I guess makes my job a little bit easier. And that's a weird thing to say, because like these are things that I've talked about for years. American imperialism didn't happen overnight. It didn't start with Donald Trump. Donald Trump has basically brought it to the forefront, and doesn't try to hide it under some kind of liberal international order patina that previous iterations of American governance has done, whether it be George W. Bush going out with Colin Powell and lying to the entirety of the United Nations and at least like presenting a reason as to why military intervention is a necessity, and you know, utilizing the mainstream resources, mainstream media in an effort to justify what came after. Trump is not doing that. He's just saying, look, I'm going to Venezuela. They got oil. I'm going to take it. And there's nothing you can do about it. Sometimes he tries, it'll be like, oh yeah, they are narco traffickers. And then they drop that immediately. And they're like, no, actually, just kidding. They're not narco traffickers. I was just playing. I just wanted to get the oil. And in a way, I think it's a really tough time to be one of these like NATO Atlanticists or one of these like liberal analysts that writes for Foreign Policy magazine, because everything that Donald Trump is doing is a play-by-play of you know, what Lenin has interpreted as the necessity for imperialism. And I don't know where we go from here as far as like whether people recognize that as wrong. I try to exhaust the contradictions to the best of my ability to explain to people, like pointing to previous examples of failure with the global war on terror, even though it was very successful for the military-industrial complex, with ballooning contracts. It was great for Halliburton. It was great for development in the region and extraction of natural resources in the region for all of these massive conglomerates. Americans, by and large, didn't experience that economic prosperity, right? The concept of labor aristocracy is valid, it's true. Having said that, Americans never really got to experience the benefits of American empire all that much. So I try to use that to the best of my ability to say, look, what we're doing in Venezuela, what we're trying to do in Cuba, this vulgar imperialism is not even beneficial for you. So we must organize against it. We must chart a different path forward, one that focuses on international cooperation rather than endless domination. I don't know if that message is being well received by the right. I will say many of them voted for Donald Trump because they thought he was anti-war, or at least that's what they tell me. And then Donald Trump will come out and be like, we're invading Venezuela for oil. And then boom, you see the approval rating on that military action. It skyrockets on the right. They're like, oh, that's awesome. That's what I wanted, actually, all along. I really wanted Exxon to have a better quarter. That's what I wanted all along. I don't need to pay rent. I don't care about that at all. I forgot about the grocery bill. So not sure what it will do. I think maybe we'll see more and more people self-identify as fascists, or maybe self-identify as whatever the MAGA train looks like, whatever the MAGA movement looks like. And we are kind of seeing that even here in Canada with the Albertan separatist movement. Oh my God, it's just, please don't give Alberta to us. I know many of you think, because I'm sorry, Canadians are either some of the best people that come to America or the worst, and nothing in between. Okay? You either, you get like, he's right. Steven Crowder, Stefan Molyneux, half of the New York Times op-ed writers. I think David Brooks, right? He might. Tom McDonald, oh my God. That's what I mean. Ted Cruz. What the hell was that? Yeah, Jordan Peterson. Okay, you guys are dunking on your own country too much. But yeah, there are too many Canadians in America ruining, leaning into American fascism a little too much for my taste. But I forgot where I was going with that. As soon as I start thinking about all these right-wing Canadians, I'm like, build the wall. No, I'm kidding.
Not such a bad idea. So, okay, I had a follow-up about, about Venezuela and this this general criticism of the U.S., right? And that's, I think, part of like the thread that runs through all this. So like, you've been, of course, very critical of U.S. actions abroad in general, U.S. foreign policy. And one of the things you also talked about, though, when it, again, as it came to the case of Venezuela, was, they have been facing a very repressive government. As you said, you don't have to necessarily agree with or want somebody like Maduro in power, but you could be critical of what the U.S. has done there, right? So could you maybe say more about and just elaborate on why you focus most of your criticism on the U.S., on its allies, and even sort of like on the West more generally? And what do you think about sort of what happens on the other side in terms of like the fact that there are, a lot of very repressive authoritarian governments? And so on, just that whole question of like liberation and supposedly going into like help these nations that have repressive governments. What are your thoughts on that? What happens on the other side?
I don't think America wants to help any of these countries. Let's just get that right out of the, let's just make that very clear, right? So I think that's a transparent lie. When America says, "Oh, we're coming to help out," just run, okay? They're not coming to help out at all. They're only there to prop up the, Chamber of Commerce and get like the agribusiness sector leaders to run the country, as they've tried to do in Venezuela many times over. Sometimes it's a vengeance quest, in the case of the endless destabilization in Haiti, or even in Cuba, our strangling of Cuba in its final iteration, but even in the aftermath of the successful revolution in Cuba, just punishing them because our ally that propped up sugar plantations failed, right? In this like incredibly repressive structure that existed. But as far as like repressive regimes around the world, I have a different outlook on this than the average American does, because I grew up in Turkey. And what I saw in Turkey, which is, again, a country that is the second largest military in NATO, a country that has had tremendous amounts of intervention, oftentimes overlooked by America, in an attempt to create a bulwark against the USSR and directly place missile bases in the vicinity of the USSR, in the immediate area that the USSR existed in. And because of that, our domestic politics has never been the same. There was a complete destruction of all sorts of different revolutionary Kurdish movements, workers' movements in my country, communist movements, socialist movements that were effectively destroyed by ultranationalists, which is a story that has played itself out in virtually every single Western European NATO ally country as well, to varying degrees. So I come from that background, and I recognize that American intervention oftentimes works with some of the most reactionary forces in the country to create some semblance of stability that is cooperative with American interests around the globe. And outside of that, though, I also recognize that when there is any additional attempt at intervention, like the coup d'etat that failed in Turkey that I wrote about for the Huffington Post, which is part of the reason why I can't go back to Turkey. They didn't like that, even though I said it was a CIA operation, which I believe it is, propped up by a CIA asset named Fethullah Gülen, who is understandably branded as a terrorist and a terrorist movement. This coup d'etat failed, and in the aftermath, there was more repression. And there was also a hardening of the otherwise the government that was falling out of favor leading up to this coup. So that's usually what many countries around the world experience whenever there's any sort of like direct Western instability and Western intervention. A lot of the more repressive forces come out and say, we are the only people who are truly anti-West. And in the region that we're both from, that expression is oftentimes fundamentalist, right? I think you know where I'm going with this, with the Iranian Revolution. Yeah. the justification for the repression that came after, especially like the destruction of communist movements and all of that. Before that, it was a popular revolution against Western intervention and a Western-backed puppet, and we here in the West don't have the capacity to interpret that. We don't have the capacity to analyze that. We just look at it and go, "Oh, those are barbaric Muslims. Those are barbaric third worldists and people from the third world. They don't understand. It's just they're too invested in Islam or something, right? And they can't comprehend that, like, for a lot of people, the wounds that they experience, the loss of life that they see, the sometimes torturous conditions that they're put through as a direct byproduct of American intervention, is the reason why they lean into some of the more repressive elements in the country, because those repressive elements might be seen as liberatory. And that's my analysis whenever I talk about like more repressive forms of governance that are in the periphery outside of the security umbrella of the United States.
Yeah, and I feel you on that. So when it comes to Iran, this is something that I've been thinking about a lot, and trying to articulate what is actually happening and what has happened in the latest protests, especially since early January. And there are all of these elements in those protests that have taken place recently in Iran. That are, a lot of them are very troubling, right? There's this question of, like, to what extent are they organic in terms of, like, what people in Iran are actually demanding and how much of it is from foreign interference. But there's, of course, the reality that, a lot of that has been long in the making, right? There have been waves and waves for decades of protest movements within Iran. But again, those have grown organically, right? They are demands that Iranians have been making against their government. And so I'm also of the view, like, I completely see what you're saying when it comes to that case against foreign intervention. We have today in the Iranian diaspora especially, there is a noticeable kind of split, right, between these pro-monarchist groups, or those who at least, have come to believe that the so-called crown prince, Reza Pahlavi, who's the son of the late Shah, that he somehow represents, liberation, right? And that he
wants to chill in Maryland. That's like, I don't think he even wants to do it. I feel like Lindsey Graham went to him and was like, "You got to do this," and he's like, "Come on."
He has not had an actual real job. No. So one of the things that has been, I think, really troubling about this kind of discourse has been that the people who have been sort of backing him among the diaspora, again, think that there's something like a viable alternative there, right? And that somebody like him, he's going to bring about supposedly a secular democratic Iran. And this gets back to that point about, like, on the flip side of it, it's like, if you disagree with that, then you are a terrorist supporter, et cetera, right? And
I'm used to it.
Yeah.
I'm like, whatever, at this point.
Socialist-oriented Muslim man, like, who would have thought that you get heat? But so again, I feel you on all of that. The question I think that remains in the case of Iran, and that I think is really pressing, is that because so much of that actual, resistance that is happening within Iran, the organic resistance by the people themselves, there are legitimate claims that people are making, right, in terms of, like, forms of freedom that they genuinely want to fight for, and they don't necessarily want foreign intervention. And I know this to be the case for a lot of Iranians who are actually inside the country, who I'm always communicating with. And so, what do you think of that when it comes to this question of, like, legitimate resistance on the part of the people themselves, without foreign intervention, and fighting for a more sort of democratic future, but on the people's own terms?
Yeah, I think American, and in the case of Iran, Israeli intervention especially, which is just basically American intervention, let's be real, ends up harming the movements, at least in terms of like the way that the majority, or not even the majority, but like a significant chunk of the population sees the legitimacy of it. And I feel as though, like, at least in my advocacy, I focus on trying to do my part as an American citizen. Oftentimes my statements fall on deaf ears, but I think the best possible thing we could do, and I know a lot of people will disagree with me on this, is to try and stop starving the Iranian population through the sanctions regime that we have implemented. Because I do believe that Western intervention legitimizes the, like, I don't believe it's legitimate what the government is doing, but I do believe that, at least in the eyes of their own, like, loyalist population, which is a significant percentage, right, 20 to 30%, it legitimizes the violent actions that they take anytime. And then it's not an accident that when Mike Pompeo comes out and says, oh, like, Mossad agents are in the crowd with you, of course the Ayatollah is going to use that as a talking point to say, see, we had to slaughter all these people because they're openly admitting it themselves. And I feel as though if the people had more of an opportunity to be able to organize to the best of their ability without having to suffer starvation as an impact of these sanctions, they would have a better opportunity to bring about legitimate, sovereign, secular democratic result for their own country. Maybe I'm too optimistic, but that's the only pathway that I can see, at least judging by, like, my own personal interactions with Turkish people and how much they despise the country and how much they rallied around the Erdogan administration in spite of their overall hatred for the Erdogan administration when the coup happened. So I think Western intervention is often not going to yield the success that Western nations want, and it's better to allow people to have their own real revolution, especially considering that, I mean, Iranian people are very resilient and maybe sometimes not even invested in any sort of outside help, sometimes to a detriment. And I guess what I'm trying to say is that like, there was a reason why the Iranian Revolution took place, and it would behoove the IRGC and the Ayatollah to remember that when dealing tremendous amounts of repression and suppression to the public, instead of listening to their demands and trying to find a more manageable solution, if that is at all possible at this point.
Yeah, and you've now that you mentioned this point about revolutionary optimism, and we're going to come back to that point. There's also, just as you were speaking, to that point about sanctions, which I think you put really well. And there's a book called How Sanctions Work by Vali Nasr and Nargis Bajogli, who I think really goes to illustrate that point about how so much of what has been happening in Iran for a very long time now is due to that pressure of sanctions and the economic hardship that has fallen on people. And I think it's great that you've also pointed to the importance of, like, the fact that people are fighting for freedom, and this is a genuine sort of movement as well. So there's a question, and I want to also include audience questions in here. I also have questions from some of my brilliant students at Fordham, and there was this one question from Sophia who asks. This is getting back to on the role of social media, and how, speaking about all of these types of issues, including American foreign policy, but also just in terms of political mobilization. This is how the question is framed. So on the role of social media, we're constantly witnessing political crises, violence, and collective mobilizations unfold in real time through our screens, which can create the sensation of hypervisibility and participation. At the same time, and I don't know if you want to speak about what's happening on the far right on certain platforms, but the far-right movements continue to grow, right, in part through similar digital platforms. So what do you think about, how we confront this kind of contradiction between digital visibility and the simultaneous strengthening of exclusionary authoritarian politics?
Yeah, I think the far right's mobilization on digital platforms still stems from the fact that they get a lot of financial backing and are not seen as antagonistic to the right-wing administrations. Left-wing mobilization, on the other hand, requires grassroots support and is often antagonistic to liberals, which is the only expression of major left-flank politics in the United States of America, at least. So for that reason, I mean, any opportunity that we have as leftists, we should seize on. So I do think that the digital grounds for organizing is still good, as long as there is still a focus on meeting one another in the real world and participate in regular society. Otherwise, all you're doing is posting on the internet. And as a prolific poster myself, I recognize that it might feel good at the time, but you're not really accomplishing any serious results doing just that. But I think overall, you like I said, you have to take every advantage that you possibly can, and I do think that the digital space has created opportunities to build communities that are sustainable, communities that can be productive. I try to use mine to the best of my ability. I try to urge people to organize. I try to urge people to move in the direction of labor unions and community organizing in general, and do fundraisers, and try to participate to the best of our ability in both broadening people's awareness on certain injustices that are taking place, but then also directly get involved as well. As far as right-wing mobilization goes, I mean, they're somewhat rudderless, they're somewhat directionless, because they are reactionary at the end of the day, and the only way that they organize is at the state level. But that is, from at least my calculations, that's just backed by capital in general. So they're going to do that no matter what. So I say we focus on our own initiatives, and we focus on creating community defense, and hopefully bring back labor militancy to a certain degree.
So very much that importance of, it's got to be accompanied by on-the-ground activities, right, and activism. So I'm going to bring in sort of more audience questions as well. As I got one more question for you that's from me. So this is on belonging and in-betweenness, right? And since you also spoke about, being from Turkey and things that you've experienced. So Edward Said, who, I take a lot of inspiration from, he memorably wrote about this experience of exile and sort of being in between, and the experience of migration. And this is something that, I think about. I have also recently been venturing into this world of like podcasts as well. And so, I addressed this with one of my colleagues and friends. We have a podcast called Politics in the Exilic City. Just quick plug on that. So you were doing your plug. I'm gonna do my plug too real quick. And it's essentially inspired by this whole sort of this question of like why that is significant, especially for us, for people like us in this day and age. And the way that Said talks about this in relation to his identity as a Palestinian and being displaced from Palestine. He had this experience of course, moving to the U.S. and having this whole academic career there. But when he made that move, right, and especially when he was in New York City, he described it in these terms. He said that belonging to both sides of the imperial divide allows you to understand them more easily, right, both sides, and that it creates these kinds of generative possibilities for what he called a double perspective. So I'm wondering, like in your case, having made these moves, do you think in any way along those terms, between your experiences between Turkey and the U.S., would you say you think about that in similar terms? And also, how do you envision your place in the U.S. And in the world generally in the years to come?
Yeah, I think, I mean, I look and sound American to a fault, right? Even though I grew up in Turkey until I was 18 years old, and that's somewhat of a product of American culture exported everywhere around the world. And I grew up, I call myself a Ameriboo, like a weeb, but for America. And I grew up being fascinated by American culture, the American dream, as many people who migrate to the West also have a similar experience. And those dreams were shattered as soon as I got the first hospital bill. I was like, this is ridiculous. That's crazy. You guys don't know that here in Canada. We yeah.
Can't relate.
Well, yet, unfortunately. Because you also have the same, capitalist forces that are doing their very best to implement austerity and then bring the private sector in. I'm gonna tell you right now, it's devastating. When you go down to the south, when you go past that border, is really bad. I don't need to tell you; you probably know. But anyway, my perspective is totally guided by my experience growing up in Turkey, and then living half of my life at this point in the United States of America. And I think it gives me unique insight, but I think it also helps me become a more effective communicator, because I have the capacity to, I guess, somewhat disarm the Western audiences by, talking like an American, but with a very different framework that I operate off of, especially as it pertains to what I consider to be this last bastion of American defense, which happens to be imperialism. Most people just take that for granted or don't even think about it, or are conditioned, at least in my experience, to go, oh, you don't like American military action, you're an outsider, you're an enemy. I'm very fortunate that I have a wonderful audience that has been much more open-minded than I ever thought they would be as far as hearing this perspective. Having said that, that's how I use this duality to my advantage. My experiences growing up in Turkey that allows me to develop a different understanding of being on the receiving end of American intervention, and then my experiences in America as an American citizen make it easier for me to communicate with Americans.
So I had one audience question that is specifically about this, actually, which is on the differences between Democrats and Republicans in the United States. So you've often said that when it comes to, for example, coming back to the question of Gaza and Palestine, that also on questions of foreign policy, that a lot of times, Democrats and Republicans don't really seem that far apart, that there isn't like a major difference between them. Yeah. So, for people who
Liberals get really mad when you say that.
Yeah.
They get so mad, and it's like, well, okay, where's Chuck Schumer? Like, where's Hakeem Jeffries?
But you got some people who, as you say, they get kind of angered by that, and then there are people who kind of like might find, they have sort of like a criticism of that, right? And this is sort of what has been popping up in some of the questions in the audience. So for people who say that kind of tends to flatten the differences, right? Or it is equating like Democrats and Republicans. Like, what's your response to that? Do you think that we should also think about what actually separates them, or do you think that it's actually necessary to frame it that way, that they're not that far apart on a lot of issues like that?
Yeah, I mean, from the perspective of Hossam Shabat, who unfortunately was assassinated by the state of Israel under the watchful gaze of the Biden administration, it doesn't make a difference whether or not Raytheon is flying the LGBTQ banner or is anti-woke, right? From the perspective of the victims, it's all the same. It's more death and more destruction. And obviously there are differences between the Democratic Party and the Republican Party, but when it comes to foreign policy, I'm not actually flattening that experience. It's just I'm looking at it from the experience of the recipient, the victims of empire. And from their perspective, there doesn't seem to be a lot of difference. Otherwise, I'd ask the people in Yemen if it felt different when Obama was bombing them, as opposed to Donald Trump bombing them, as opposed to Biden bombing them, as opposed to Trump bombing them again, right? It makes no difference to them whether it's a Democrat or a Republican, because every president has to bomb Yemen, I think. I don't know if it's in the Constitution or not, but that's just what they've been doing so far. And that's basically what it is. I think a lot of Americans don't want to recognize that, and they also don't want to understand that what I want is a real anti-imperialist party. So when I communicate that to my electeds, when I talk about this with people who are consulting for the Democratic Party, when I talk to politicians, both on camera and off camera, this is what I try to communicate to them, that if you want people to see that you are different, that you're charting a different path, then you have to communicate that. You can't be shy about saying it out loud. And I think that demonstrating this moral backbone will be beneficial down the line, even from an electoral perspective. We've seen that now with the tide shift that took place on Gaza. I think before October 7, you would get punished if you actually were outspoken about the plight of Palestinians. And now, if you dare to say that you're pro-Israel, at least on the Democratic Party side, a lot of people are going to yell at you and might not even vote for you. I mean, we're seeing as the midterms are coming up, we're seeing this be a major point of contention, a way to show that you're earnest, show that you're different from other politicians. Many people in the primaries are positioning themselves as being anti-Israel. So there's electoral benefit as well. Not only is it the morally correct position, but it's also an electorally beneficial position too. So I try to stress that to the best of my ability, and hope that maybe one of these two major parties will truly present an anti-imperialist path forward, one that recognizes the dignity and sovereignty of nations and doesn't see them as simple collateral damage in our endless profit seeking.
Right. Yes, sir. Yeah. So, I mean, this is a very related question that's popped up a lot in the audience questions. So, at the level of institutions, when it comes to countering those kinds of things, do you think that universities generally should be looking more at divestment? So, for example, UBC, other universities.
Absolutely. Yes. You're going to get in trouble. Yes, of course. I'm a massive advocate for boycotts, divestments, and sanctions on the state of Israel. 100%. It's the least we could do. And it's been successful in the past. I mean, this is exactly what happened with apartheid South Africa. And unfortunately, apartheid South Africa's close ally, apartheid Israel, recognized how devastating that was for South Africa. So they took the initiative to make sure that it doesn't work in the Western world. But absolutely, I think profiteering off of these war crimes is morally unconscionable. And once again, it goes back to the argument that I was presenting earlier. It's the most peaceful solution to sever ties with Israel to the best of our ability, to participate in cultural boycotts, to, at least in the most peaceful ways, punish the state of Israel for engaging in these heinous crimes. If we're really anti-genocide, we have to do that. It's the bare minimum, in my opinion.
So this is kind of, again, this is going to lead us to thinking about the question of real, genuine things that could be done for the betterment of the world and of those who suffer under these kinds of conditions. One of the things that tends to predominate in a lot of ways these days is the question of doomerism, right? That, so many people find it really difficult to maintain a sense of hope in the face of everything that is happening around us. So how do you think, and then we'll kind of approach the question one more time in a different way after this too, but generally, how do you think we deal with doomerism?
Solidarity. Solidarity is the antidote to the poison of divisiveness. Our capital overlords want us to be fighting one another all the time, neighbor against neighbor, sectarian conflict, ethnicities, all of this stuff. But in my experience, I feel alienated when I'm at home, when I'm in front of a computer. But in my experience, going all around the world, participating in protests, tasting the tear gas and pepper spray of French police and American police and, police of all different backgrounds, I can tell you that when you're in that crowd with like-minded individuals who are singularly focused, who recognize right from wrong, solidarity is the closest expression to love that I have ever felt with my fellow man, no matter where I go. And that's precisely how I maintain revolutionary optimism.
So, the last question I want to ask you is to really delve into the meaning and the ways to actualize that kind of revolutionary optimism, right? And what it means to you. And I know that you have spoken about this, very, very powerfully in sort of speeches that you've given. What would you say it looks like? Like, what is, if you had to elaborate finally on this question of revolutionary optimism, what does it mean? What does it look like in the future?
I think we have to recognize the small victories that we take and hold on to them and recognize that in order to build the society, the future that we want to see, the future that we all envision, that is better for everyone around the world, we cannot cast aside small victories, no matter how silly it may seem. It can be converting one of your close loved ones, bringing them back to reality. It can be receiving a better contract at the end of a strike, work stoppage. Or it could be participating in activism. It could be participating in these mass demonstrations and then getting the American government to pull back from occupying your streets like we saw in Minneapolis. It can also sometimes even mean voting for a candidate for the first time that makes you feel like your voice mattered, in spite of all of the odds stacked against Zohran Mamdani in New York City. Both the establishment Democrats and the entirety of the Republican Party came after him, and people went out in the streets, they went out, they protested, they voted for Zohran Mamdani, and now at the heart of Capitol in New York City, you have a 34-year-old Muslim socialist, anti-Zionist mayor for the first time ever. So while things feel hopeless overall, I hold on to moments like that and remind myself that there are more of us than there are of them. There are more of us out here that recognize right from wrong than there are of those who seek to divide us. And that is what's important, and that's what helps me maintain my revolutionary optimism. Solidarity forever.
Beautifully said. Beautifully said. Thank you. Thank you. This was fantastic.
All right.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Right.
Are we getting up? Thank you for coming, guys.